19 team lists. Having a look at how these fit for NRL Fantasy. So that's round 19, team lists, NRL Fantasy. Let's jump right into it. So first team we got here, Tigers up against the Sharks. Now, Tigers v Sharks, that was a rough game last week. The Tigers conceded a big bunch of points there to the Cowboys. Sharks put on a show against Dragons, so I think we can make a call that the Sharks are probably going to win this game against Tigers, and probably by a decent margin as well. Having a look at this team list for the Tigers, look, first things first, Dave Nofaluma's out, Brenton Aiden's out. Both those guys have shoulder injuries. It's not going to have big fantasy implications for us. We've got Tommy Talau coming in, Asu Kapoa. I'm not even really interested in these guys for draft, let alone for fantasy at all either. So, and hey, Kay Williams, see, number one, first, love it. But yeah, I'm not interested in those guys there. What is interesting here is Dream Buller. So I was chatting a bit last week at NRL.com, and I was sort of calling out that the Tigers are going to struggle at times, and we might want to look at moving Dream Buller out of our teams at some point soon. Now, he obviously fell to earth really hard in that game against the Cowboys last week. They got absolutely dusted, 74-0. It's going to be tough for an attacking stat-reliant fullback to score in that sort of game. I'm kind of looking at his matchups now and thinking maybe we should hold on to Buller. And look, it's risky because he could lose dollars very, very quickly, especially if the Tigers go downhill. But he's got the Knights and the Dragons after Origin. And the Dragons especially are a nice matchup for Buller. And the other thing is, when he's been scoring well, he hasn't been scoring on the back of great structure from the Tigers or anything like that. He's been scoring on the back of individual plays. So can he continue that? Can he maintain that? Potentially. He might be that guy that you want to have on the end of your bench as that 18th man before you then move other guys into the starting side like Ponga or maybe Dylan Edwards or Pappenhausen. If he comes back, maybe Latrell as well. Next group here, Dane Laurie at number 6. Now, Dane Laurie's not a guy we're considering for regular NRL fantasy, but if you are running with maybe a weaker set of wing fullbacks in a draft league, you might look at Dane Laurie. I've grabbed Dane Laurie in a couple of draft leagues. He scored 37 last week in a game where the Tigers got absolutely destroyed. So you got him at number 6. He's going to get his hands on the ball. Brandon Wakeham's not that dominant number 7. So there's every chance that Dane Laurie could potentially be in a situation where he might produce pretty good fantasy scores. If you throw some attacking stats on top, then, hey, wow, that could be really interesting. He could be a guy that averages 40 points at wing fullback, and if he's on the waiver wire, then, yeah, go make that move. Another one to look at here on this team list is we've got John Bateman. So John Bateman has moved back to the edge back row spot. He's in number 12 jersey now. He's next to Isaiah Papali'i. Look, a couple of things here that have impacted fantasy. So one, people were moving into Sean Bloor. Now, when we look at Sean Bloor, that was a risky option. He was cheap. He was cheap for a reason. He's obviously back to the bench now. So if you grabbed him, you're probably going to have to move him on. I mean, you could he has pretty good scores in the rolling average, so you could potentially run a situation where maybe you're keeping Sean Bloor in there for one more week, see how he goes this week, see if he can get back into the starting side. He probably won't lose money, but he's probably one to get rid of. The other one to look at here is John Bateman. So when we're talking about John Bateman, he's gone back to the edge. Now, a lot of his appeal going to the middle was he was going to have that dual position going through around 21. And he was also going to have a much higher defensive base. So a lot of tackles, a lot that we could rely on. Obviously on the edge, he's a bit more attack and stat reliant, and this Tigers team isn't producing many of those. I'd love to know in the comments, though, for all the NRL Fantasy, all the NRL Supercoach players here, are you going to be keeping John Bateman? If you don't have Bateman, would you still buy him, or are you steering clear? Now, next guy who we're going to look at is the hooker position. So Jake Simpkin, Talon De Silva. Look, for Simpkin and De Silva, Simpkin hasn't quite gotten the minutes I was hoping for since he's taken over that role. De Silva's taken a lot more minutes than I thought he would. He's taking about 30 minutes there, whereas Simpkin's keeping about 50 minutes, which he's still producing some pretty good scores, sort of between 40 and 50 points, but I was kind of hoping he'd get a few more minutes there. Still, he's been a good cash cow, and he's a guy you can hold on to. On the Sharks side of things, look, that back line, the ship sort of sailed on a few of these guys. There was a period where Talakai was really good value, and that was really interesting. Jesse Ramian, he's been inconsistent, a bit hot and cold. He's sort of hit a pretty mediocre score last week with a try. Would have liked it more there. Mulatalo, kind of a pod. I wouldn't touch Katara or Kennedy, and to be honest, Mulatalo maybe a guy you target in the draft league. You're probably not going to buy him for your regular league. Nico Hines. Look, he's got to be a captain this week up against the Tigers. It's just too easy to be captaining Nico Hines this week. And then we'll go to the forward pack. Britton Nakora, really interesting one. Look, he keeps his spot, obviously, but he scored 2 tries last week. So 2 tries, 53 fantasy points. Now, if you got on Nakora, you're probably not that upset because you were looking at him. You might have been considering Isaiah Papali'i, who got 44, John Bateman, who got 33. So you got the best score out of the 3, but 53 points with 2 tries, that's a rough situation to be in for a fantasy scorer. The other one here that I'd keep an eye on more for draft leagues again is Cam McInnes. So obviously Dale Finucane's out this week. Cam McInnes, when he plays that 13 role and plays big minutes, very nice. Next group here we're going to go to is the Dragons and the Raiders. And this probably looked like a game where you thought, maybe this is a game where the Raiders will blow the Dragons out. But I'm having a look at these team lists, and I'm sort of thinking this might be a closer game than we thought. Now, obviously, the Dragons without Ben Hunt. There's no Tyrell Sloan there as well, so the attack could potentially struggle in this game. But the forward pack is looking reasonably full strength, obviously, without Jack Bird. But when we compare that to the Raiders, no Corey Horsburgh. He's out in Origin. No Josh Papali'i. He's out injured as well. You got a team where, the middle forward rotation now becomes Emre Gula, Joseph Tarpanay, and Ada Mariota, because obviously Pasami Solo, he's out as well. Then we got Hudson Young. He comes back. He's not playing Origin this week. So if you have him in your fantasy side, probably not too many do. That's pretty interesting. We've got a question here from Rob Alexander. What do you think about Dylan Lucas as a keep or sell? Oh, Dylan Lucas. He showed a bit, didn't he? He showed a bit. He was available at center, which was really nice. The problem there is that he's just not going to come back into the side unless there's issues with Lachlan Fitzgibbon or Tyson Frizzell. So if those guys are fit, then he's not worth too much. I'd probably be selling if I could buy someone good for him. But at the same time, if he did hang on, both those guys have had challenges with injuries. There is potentially comes back into the side. So totally up to you with your team. I'd be selling personally. Let's jump back into the Raiders here. Look, Jamal Fogarty is another one as well. If you could have potentially looked at Fogarty a couple of months ago, he was in a bit of a downward sort of form trajectory for a while there, and he's really picked back up. Now he's up to averaging about 48.7, I believe it is, which is fantastic. And he's definitely been the dominant half out of all the halves available in this game. We'll skip into the next game here. We got the Eels and the Warriors, and this one's pretty juicy. These team lists could change a bit more before game day as well, which is pretty exciting. Now, for the Parramatta Eels, look, obviously Clint Gutherson, he's out in Origin. That means we've got Sean Russell at number 1. Sean Russell at number 1 could be interesting for his fantasy scoring. The Warriors aren't slouches, though, so I think that might be a bit of a lighter score for Sean Russell. Looking at the back line, it's pretty unchanged. Russell obviously goes to fullback, which means that we've got a fill-in at number 5 with Lumi. We've still got Penasini and Simonson. They've been very good options recently. So if you got on Penasini earlier in the year, you've been enjoying that. If you got on Simonson around the time that Billy Smith was hot as well, you've been enjoying that because Simonson's been averaging about 45 over the last 5 weeks. So he's been that guy, and he was available for near base price, which is pretty insane. For the Parramatta side, look, obviously Ryan Madison, Dejan Arce, we saw that before. That worked really well for Parramatta last time, but they did verse a weaker Manly side when they used that half pairing last time. This time around, we've got Luke Metcalf and Sean Johnson as their opponent halves, and the Warriors forward pack that has been very solid through this year. So it could be a tougher game for those guys. I think we could see a bit of a struggle with creativity in this Parramatta attack, and that means there could be a bit of a lack of attacking ball going out to the backs. So if Simonson and Penasini are going to get it done this week, it's probably going to be on the back of winning their individual matchups or big work rates. So we'll see what happens there. It's going to be a really good game. In the forward pack for Para, look, Junior Paulo, he's out of Origin. Regan Campbell-Gillard's into Origin, so it doesn't really impact things too much. The other one I thought might crop up as more of a problem through this period is Jermaine Hopgood. Now, he's number 19, which is... thanks, mate. Yes, I think, I was definitely there at Parramatta Eels signing. So, yeah. But yeah, Jermaine Hopgood, he's a number 19 for Queensland. I thought he might crack in to the Origin side just at some point, even as an 18th man, and he hasn't done that. So If you bought Hopgood through this period, you are loving life. And Jack, spot on. SJ might be out with a baby due this week. That's the hot talk on the Warriors side of things. So Sean Johnson could be pulled out, obviously on the extended bench, but just hop down to that. We've got Ronald Volkman there as well. He's sort of on standby for Sean Johnson. If Sean Johnson's out of this game, then we're going to see two teams that are probably going to be a bit directionless. So no Sean Johnson there. Obviously, Parramatta's missing their whole starting spine, which is pretty crazy. It's a situation where this game could go either way. I think the Warriors will probably get it done if Sean Johnson's playing. They'll just have too much class. It could be a good day for a few of those outside backs. It's a day where you're not going to captain Sean Johnson because Nico Hines that option, but Johnson could have a good game. In the forward pack, look, if you have Tohu Harris already, he's a good one to have. I might not be buying Tohu this week, though. So if you were looking at Tohu, it's a bit tricky with the middles. Tohu's a little bridge away from one of those top flight guns. I just think guys like Isaiah Yeo, Cam Murray when he's at his best, Corey Horsburgh, Jack DeBellin. There's a few other guys, Payne Haas in that conversation as well. Even Adam Fanua-Blake, just at another level compared to Tohu Harris. Tohu's probably going to sit a little bit below those guys, so you probably want to hold out and get one of those guys instead rather than moving in for Tohu Harris. I myself have Joey Tarpanay, and I think he's kind of in that similar level where he's not quite a top flight gun. So you're probably going to have to move off him eventually, but at the same time, these guys can hit form at the right time. Question from Wayne here is S. Smith a trade out Sandon Smith? I'd assume there. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Sandon Smith, he's playing good footy. For me, he passes the eye test, and his fantasy scoring profile has been fantastic. So, yeah, I think he's an easy hold. He's scoring really well, between 40 and 50 points whenever he starts. Sandon Smith's a guy where I'm going to sit on him until he gets dropped, basically. And I just don't think he will. I think if the Roosters continue to lose, then they might shut Luke Keary down instead, because Keary is obviously carrying that injury. Yeah, it could just mean Sam Walker comes back in. It could mean we see Sandon Smith with Joey Manu. The advantage that Sandon Smith has is that he's probably the only pure 7 that the Roosters have, whereas they have a lot of options at number 6 jersey. So, yeah, really interesting one. In the forward pack here, look, Jackson Ford, you probably moved off him a while ago. I wouldn't be buying too many of these guys. Adam Fanua-Blake has that attacking upside where he's one that you could look at. But other than that, I'm probably steering clear. The other thing to note here, too, is Sean Lane comes back onto the bench for Parramatta. So he's in that number 16 jersey. That could change on game day. He could get a start. He could also just come in off the bench 20 minutes in, play 60 minutes. He's in a situation where, look, Sean Lane had that 1 year where he was a top flight talent for NRL Fantasy, which was fantastic. But he relies on Dylan Brown. And Dylan Brown's just come through with his sentence. So he's got 7 weeks off. That means, yeah, he's served 3 of those weeks. He's got 4 weeks left. You probably want Dylan Brown to be back to really unlock Sean Lane. So I don't think Sean Lane's a legitimate gun. He was interesting when he came back the first time, about 8 weeks ago. At this point of the season, you want a real gun, and Sean Lane isn't that guy. We'll skip through to the next group here. So we got the Bunnies and the Dogs. And can the Dogs come back? I mean, if they lost 66-0 to the Knights, what are they going to do against the Bunnies? And just before we go into that, best captain option this week for fantasy, I was going to ask there. Look, for the best captain option, it's Nico Hines. Nico Hines up against the Tigers. There really isn't a second place. It goes Hines, then maybe Jack DeBellin, I think, is really interesting. I think he's got a softer Raiders matchup where they're missing a lot of forwards, but Nico Hines is that one you want. Dylan Brown, no, it's a 7-week suspension. So he's served 3 weeks. He's got 4 weeks left. He'll be back in, what will that be, like round 23, something like that. Sel Oluwapu, absolutely. Yes, Sexton comes in. We'll go to that team list right now. So, doggies first. We'll do doggies first because a few people are asking about them. For the doggies, Averillo goes to fullback. This is more of a cosmetic change. You got Carraz, you got Braden Burns comes in to Pine at center. Blake Wilson's there too. I've heard a bit of good stuff about Blake Wilson in general as far as his fantasy production in reserve grade. So that's kind of interesting, but it's just not the right part of the season to be buying a guy like Blake Wilson from the Bulldogs. So I'd be steering clear. One that's tricky is a lot of people have Matt Burton in their fantasy sides. And, you know, he had that 17-point game last week, which was rough to watch. Now, I think Sexton in is a good and a bad for Matt Burton. In real life, it's fantastic for Matt Burton because it allows him to play more of that 6 role. He'll probably just run the ball more, probably play a bit more creative sort of style, and Sexton will take that 6 role on. Sorry, the 7 role on there. But in fantasy, Burton probably loses some kick meters. He could potentially lose goal kicking. Sexton's a pretty good goal kicker. He might pick up some more attacking stats potentially. I'm hoping that the running game comes out more. I think we could see Matt Burton go away from being that all-round sort of fantasy scorer to being a bit more like Dylan Brown was, where he's not doing as much kicking, still doing about half the kicking, but he's got much more running game because he's playing a lot wider. A couple of questions coming through here. So, got name a car for an edit. We got to go Toyota 86. I want to see that. Respect you as a Para fan. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. Respect Bulldogs fans who are still loyal. A couple of questions here. Lemuelu, is he a trade out? Lemuelu is a hold. Lemuelu is a firm hold in my eyes. I'm just thinking, like, look, the opportunity is too good. He played 80 minutes last week. It was not a good game for him fantasy-wise. But he's proven time and time again that he's a pretty good fantasy scorer, especially for the center position. So if we're going to see him playing 80 minutes again on the edge back row spot, he's just a great option. And you've already lost a lot of money there. I think he's worth the risk because he plays this week too. But at the same time, if you do have doubts and you don't believe in him and you think maybe they're going to start Kenny Bromwich and either Ewan Aitken or Felice Kafusi, maybe you sell. Maybe you sell. This is the week to do it, but I'll be holding on myself. When is Angus Crichton due back? Oh, if you're holding on to draft league, okay. For Angus Crichton, I just don't think that the pathway is there to minutes. I think they really don't believe in him. The Butcher brothers will be back post-bye. Nat Butcher did pick up a little niggle there, but he's just a little bit too far back. And look, Tupanua out, that definitely helps Gus Crichton. But yeah. Yes, this is being recorded for YouTube. So yeah, check out The Casual Athlete on YouTube and you can see what we're all looking at here as well. Next question here. Thoughts on Toby Sexton, possible pickup? That's really interesting. He can score some fantasy points, Toby Sexton, which is interesting. I think he's more interesting for a draft league. So if you've got a situation where your halves are a bit weak, you maybe only have 2 halves. One of them's out in a bye this week, or they're an origin player, something like that. Sexton's a guy I'd be prioritizing for a draft league. For real fantasy, I just think he's not quite at that top gun level. So I'd probably be steering clear, but let's take a look and see how it goes. I mean, he's next to a pretty dominant half in Matt Burton. That's a challenge there with him. And then Cleese Haas, is he a decent buy? Cleese Haas, I mean, let's jump down to that team list for a second and have a look. Because Cleese Haas gets that starting role. He's only in for Dave Fafita. Look, I was looking at Cleese Haas a couple of weeks ago, and with him, it was looking a bit like he might surpass Joe Stimson. So if you surpass Joe Stimson, then he was a very interesting buy. Look, the run meters aren't the best. The base stats aren't the best, but he's shown some attacking stat capability, and he was at a good price. Now, he's only filling in for Dave Fafita. Look, Dave Fafita will come back next week. Titans need wins to make the 8 with how good the Cowboys have been as well. So, yeah, I'd be steering clear. How many minutes do you think Lane will get this week? I think Lane plays about 55 minutes. I think he'll come on and not go off. Is Turpin a sell? Absolutely. Yep, Turpin's a sell. Look, Brandon Smith's back around 2021. It's a pretty easy choice to move him on. And his price rises have slowed down now. So he could come back and he could score well, maybe 1 or 2 more weeks, but you might as well move on. He's done his job. Do you think Johnson will bounce back from last week? Absolutely, but Sean Johnson could be out this week. So he might be attending the birth of his second child, sorry. So the bounce back will be delayed, but look, Sean's in fantastic form and they're not losing too many games like that. The Warriors are playing absolutely great footy. Up the Warriors, absolutely, TK. Do you think Gould will pull a Christmas miracle for the Dogs this week? Gould's pulled his miracle, mate. The miracle Gould has pulled here is that he got Toby Sexton to the team. So for the first time in a long time, the Dogs have a very legitimate number 7 who can take on steering the team there. Do you think Parra can win this week? Yes, absolutely, especially if Sean Johnson's out. But if Johnson plays, Warriors are rightful favourites. For a Wires fan, good luck this weekend, brother. We're going to need it if Johnson plays. If he doesn't, then this could be a pretty dodgy game. Question here, thinking of trading Robson to hand, and let's cover for SJ or Chris. Losing 350. I don't know about trading out Robson at this point. Robson's close enough to being a gun, and I'm looking at the hookers here. Look, Harry Grant's obviously the number one hooker, but Damien Cook's not doing great. Jeremy Marshall-King's carrying injuries. Robson's hit and miss as well. There weren't any tackles to make last week for him. I'd probably just try to keep Robson, I think. And Brandon Hands, I'm not rushing to buy him. I think he was an option when he was base price. I think it's too late now to go to him. Want to cash out Turpin for a cheap center or wing fullback? Is Ramian worth it? If not, who do you suggest? I think we're going to go for that price. Valence Tavares, he's been great. And look, Branko Lee is fit again, and Valence Tavares is keeping that spot. So I think he's the better option. He's got a lot of upside. He's a guy you can loophole. He's still pretty cheap, but you got to do it this week. Otherwise, it's going to be sort of out of range for price affordability. I'm going to make a quick buck off Haas then. Easy peasy. You think Alamotti wakes his way back in? It's a great question. Is he on the extended bench? Alamotti? I'm not sure what happened to him. Was he just dropped? He might have been dropped. Pretty tough game. I'm not actually sure if he was injured. Look, for Alamotti, he's the future, obviously, for the Dogs. I don't think Jackson Tapine and Braden Burns are the guys that they're banking on for next year. I think they just want to get Alamotti's confidence back up. And I wouldn't be holding on to him for fantasy by any means, but he's a guy I'll be looking at very closely next year, and probably will start the year with him next year because, you know, that first season for outside backs, some of them take a bit of time to acclimatize. I think Alamotti's shown a bit of talent in amongst, you know, some lesser games. I'm a big fan of Alamotti in general. I think he'll kick on next year. But for this year, it's done. How do you feel about Nicarima? Was tempted to pass him on, but I've been holding. He's starting again this week. He's starting again, and it's not a bad matchup for Nicarima, so that's kind of interesting. I'll just check the TikTok questions here. Selling Turpin and Oluwapu, buying Hines. I don't know who else to buy. Got 386K in the bank. 386K. Check out Buy, Hold, Sell. We release that tomorrow morning. I'll go through those cheapy options there. Don't have anyone off the top of my head right now. Lumi being named for Parazawari. You're telling me. Is Nas a potential keeper? So Nelson Surf Solomona, that's really interesting. For a Surf Solomona, we're looking at a guy here who is massively oversized for the edge, and that's a plus and a minus. So in attack, it's great. He's a massive producer with attacking stats on that spot. The downside is that he got very tired in last week's game. You saw the Storm sort of fall off the boiler down the stretch. That's not all Nelson's fault, but I don't know if Craig Bellamy confidently relies on him as a defensive presence on the edge, and I think Bellamy really prioritizes that. So I think we're going to see maybe 3 more weeks at the most of Nelson on the edge before he goes back to prop. And when he's at prop, he's not a keeper. But on the edge, he is. So that's a tricky thing there. You're going to have to, if you're buying Nelson, you're going to be selling him soon enough. And he doesn't play this major buy round either. So probably a skip for me. Next group, loving the Eels shirt. Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit thicker, so it's good for a morning stroll when it's a bit cold. No, I love it. Train down Turpin to Chris. Sebastian Chris. There's a lot of talk about Sebastian Chris. I'm not that excited about Chris. I don't know, Xavier Savage is on the extended bench for the Raiders as well. I just think Chris could sort of slip out. And let's go back to the Raiders team list. Because you've got, like, Tomoko is obviously their best center. And that's not really up for discussion. And then Jared Croker, he's playing pretty good footy. They've obviously got that real emotional investment in him as well. So I don't know if Chris has the job security for me to be buying him. I'd almost rather just cash out completely at this point, or grab someone who's minimum price and, yeah, go from there. Let's go back to these team lists here. So Dogs team list. I want to keep a bit more of a look at this. And look, I think people have been very critical of the Dogs this week. I think it's a little unfair, not completely unfair, but you look at their team last year and they had Luke Thompson firing. They had Paul Vaughan firing, who went to the Super League. They've brought in Viliami Kikau as well at the start of this year. And they've got now a team where, guys like Jaden Ockenbaugh are starting in the edge back row spots. Max King, who was coming off the bench last year, he now has to be that main prop. Ryan Sutton, he's come across and had to step up as well. Tevita Pangai, mixed form. So I think the Dogs, with Sexton now, they're going to look a lot better. And they'll get Stephen Crichton next year as well. They just need to add a little bit of starch into that middle, and they could easily be a team that's competing for the 8. So I think Doggies fans need to keep their heads up. It's going to look better next year, but this team list is rough, and I don't know. I mean, looking at South, let's go to South. Like they're missing their whole spine basically as well. So you've got Lachlan Ilias, who's obviously starting. Then Dean Hawkins at 6, Blake Taff at 1, Silva Havili at 9. They could struggle on attack too. They could struggle for creativity. So that's a tricky one for them. Look, I think if we're talking about Alex Johnston, a few people have asked me about him, especially for Supercoach. I think he could struggle in this game. I mean, look, the Dogs' defense is not good at all, and they concede plenty of tries on the left. But South's attack will be a bit disjointed this week. So just keep an eye on that. Looking at the forwards here, look, Tavita Totola, if you still have him, obviously hold on one more week. He should go off this game. He should have a big game because there's no Cam Murray. You've obviously got no Jai Arrow. Is Hame Sele back to the bench. Yeah, David Miley back to the bench. They're very light. They're very light. Even the edge back row spots, Michael Cheekham, Ben Lovett. Actually, how much does Lovett cost? I'm going to have to find out how much Lovett costs because that could be interesting for a cash out for some people as well. We got a comment from Chaz. Love your content, mate. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. Need a center and looking to trade Ramian and Bird. Ooh, so I'd keep Ramian for one more week. Just let him ride. He's obviously got a really nice matchup against the Tigers. They've had some big changes in their back line, and they conceded 74 last week. For Bird, best center option. Do you want someone that's playing this week? I mean, you could look at probably a lot of these guys have buys next week, but Penasini is the number one center option. I wish I had a space in my centers for Penasini because he's been in fantastic form. The other guy you could look at potentially is Zach Lomax, Megapod. The challenge with Lomax is that he misses next week. So Dragons have that by around 20. That's a bit tricky. And that's one thing I'd recommend people keep a look at too. I've got a few middles in this game. So I've got Jack DeBellin. I've got Joey Tarpanay. I've also got Corey Horsburgh. So for my team, they're all on a buy for around 20. So next week is tougher than this week for my middle forwards. Next group here, do we have any other games there, or are we all sorted? No, we got the Dolphins. Let's go to the Dolphins. So look, Valence Tavare, he keeps his spot. Mentioned that before. Branko Lee is fully fit. That's good for Val. It's good for footy. I love watching him play. He's been good. Even in games where the Dolphins have gotten destroyed, Valence Tavare has been fantastic. You got Ewan Aitken back to the centers there. Look, Tessie New, Jermaine Asako. Asako has been in form. I wouldn't be buying Asako, but if you have Asako, you can let it ride one more week. Cody Nicarima back to fullback. Look, Sean O'Sullivan, he's a guy, if you're in a draft league and you need a half, see if he's available because he's been a bit out of form since he came back. He can be a 50 average, sort of at best there, so keep an eye on that. For the forward pack, Jeremy Marshall-King, there was talk he could be out for the year, but they're going to be managing that shoulder issue that he has. It's still tricky. It's still tricky with Jeremy Marshall-King. If you own him, I'd be looking to sell soon. Maybe you hold on to him this week, but I'd be looking to sell very soon because he's just a risk of going off the field every time he plays. So, yeah, he'll get shut down at some point this year, I think. Lemuelu, he keeps his starting spot. Felice Kafusi's out for this week, so it doesn't really tell us too much. But, hey, I'm happy as an owner. Ray Stone keeps that lock roll. I think they're going to need to upgrade the size of their pack soon. Jared Wallace comes back from a 3-game suspension. So, yeah, that could potentially impact things. I think he's a very important part of their pack. He's one of the strongest men in the league. So he should help add some starch to the middle for them. Breezy fans, downlight shines great on the head. Absolutely. It's as bright as my future in fantasy. So appreciate it, mate. Had there been an update on Payne Haas's ankle injury? The latest I've heard is it's pretty minor. It's obviously going to make him miss Origin this week, but I'd expect him to be back next week. If you have him, obviously you're holding on because he's a season keeper and it's a minor injury. If you don't have him, obviously you're not buying him at this point. Anyway, look, that's a look at our team list. We're going to be doing buy, hold, sell That'll go live at 7 a.m. tomorrow. So make sure to follow us on TikTok here and also subscribe to YouTube. And we'll see you on the next video. Catch you there.